Welcome to From Caving In to Crushing It, the podcast for those who find themselves immersed in adversity and choose to write their story instead of having others write it for them. I'm Drew Durrani, and I'm your host. So welcome everybody to the Men Supporting Men Collaboration Tribe, and I'm going to be interviewing Jason Croft, and it's going to be really the episode 1 of the podcast, From Caving In to Crushing It, Men Know Your Worth, Stand Your Ground. And I asked Jason to come on to tell us about himself and his journey. So Jay, I'll let you introduce yourself and we'll start talking.
Sounds good. Glad to be here, Drew. Gentlemen, good to see you all. This is a blast. My name is Jason Croft. I have a company called Media Leads and a couple of different shows that I do. I'm a father of 3 boys, moved to Colorado a few years ago because I needed mountains in my life, and they speak to my soul, and I get up into them as much as possible, for sure. But yeah, I've got a background of 30 years in video, film, movies, corporate events, that whole world. And a few years ago, put myself in front of the camera, in front of the I guess it's behind the mic, in front of the camera, all those things. Simply to as a means of interviewing. Started out with a little, marketing test, doing it. Felt like, I've got no business doing it, but I'm going to do it anyway. Found out I loved it. And that's the main thing that I do now, is helping other people create their shows and doing shows of my own. And that's the highlights right now.
Well, you hit on something that I do want to talk to you about, because many of us fear failure and sometimes some of us have a fear of success. And I was talking to my 16-year-old daughter, and she said, Dad, how do people have a fear of success? I said, some people, if they don't have self-confidence and self-respect, and they think they're going to build something and screw it up, that's how some people can be. What I admire about what you said, Jason, is that you just thought about doing it, didn't know how to do it, but you did it anyway. Tell me about how you had that internal motivation to just go and try something without being afraid of failure or even success.
Yeah, it's something that really was sort of my defining moment, defining decision, is a more of a thing than a moment. And I think, most of us, big transformations, they might come down to a decision. It's rarely like, I did this one thing and everything was perfect after that. But that decision was really wanting to be that outgoing person, that connector. I read Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point, way back years ago when it came out. And he's describing the 3 types of people, like the mavens, the connectors, and totally blanking on the third one. But that connector person, that role, just knows everybody, brings people together, does all of that. I sat there reading that. I was like, oh my God, I still get chills thinking about it right now, because I was just like,
Right.
That's what I want to be. That's what I want to do. And the weird part was that I was the furthest thing in the world from it. Right. I was the guy that, man, if I could possibly get myself to go to some networking deal, standing, against the wall, hoping maybe somebody, says hi to me first, all that.
Right.
And, a few things happened. There was that decision that I want to be, I want to be better at this, and then a few things came together all at once, kind of the perfect storm to make it happen. Number one was that decision, right? So then after that, I got really purposeful with, I'm reading about how to network better, how to connect with people, how to talk to people better, just how to, watching those videos, like how to present yourself and do this and do that. And so just that skill set fascinates me. I think turning 40 was one of those things that, I don't know, there was something to like, oh, I don't give a crap what people think. Like I just like all of a sudden realized it. I'm like, oh, who cares, you know? And
Right.
so then I'm busting through the doors of a networking and like, hey, what's up, everybody? You know, like just
Yeah.
that little decision.
Right.
I mean, that's a big filter to put everything through if you don't care anymore. You're not worried about it anymore.
Right. Right.
Um, and then along that same time, I started a show called Startup Dallas. I worked for a video production company when I was back in Dallas.
Mhm.
And just as a marketing idea, it's kind of discovered the startup community and thought they would be perfect, you know, just a whole avenue for, selling video production services that,
Mhm.
was my role, marketing and sales.
Right.
And I was like, oh, well, this is cool. I'm just, I always look for that unique thing to kind of figure that out and get in front of people and talk to people instead of just like, hey, you want to buy this? Hey, you want to buy this?
Right.
And we're sitting here with a studio, we've got all the gear, all the space. I was like, we could just kind of start a show, interview the people who, we'd love to eventually be clients and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
I mean, nobody else is going to sit in the chair and do the interviews. I'll do it, what the heck.
Right. Right.
And that was all of those things coming together just changed everything because again, it wasn't that, oh, I want to be this great TV personality person. And
Right.
that was the, like the trajectory. It was certainly I wanted to be that connector. I wanted to be that person. But then it was just sort of a means to an end to sit in the chair and host this.
Right.
But then what that did, unbeknownst to me when I was starting it,
Mhm.
was it just lit something up in me. I was like, holy smokes, this is it. Like I
Wow.
love this. And it wasn't
Right.
um necessarily the camera part or anything like that. It was that connection. It was that interviewing that other person that I was across from. And from there, when I left that company, I knew I had to keep this going because that was just a part of my soul now, that I
Right.
figured out. And it's been a blast, that lit, I mean, that changed my entire trajectory. Like everything I do now has to have that component going on, whether it's the
Okay.
main thing or a piece of it. And so that's, it's one of those things that it's good that it's functional. There's a use for it, but it's
Right.
also like, I've got to do this, it's
Absolutely.
so much fun.
So if you hadn't picked up that book, Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, where do you think you'd be?
I don't know. That's always tough. It would have been something else? Would I still have done maybe the show thing down the road
Right. Right.
because it was still just a marketing idea?
Yeah.
Who knows? But it was something that it allowed me to just it painted that picture, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
oh, that's it. Like these vague things of I'd like this quality or I'd like that quality. It's like
Mhm.
that's the thing. And so I went from, you know, being the furthest thing from that, like I
Yeah.
said,
Right.
to 2-3 years later, I've got one of the top like connector pieces people in
Right.
Dallas
Yeah.
calling me because she needs this type of person at her next event. Hey, I know you know everybody. Can you do that? And it was one of those little moments I was like, oh, that's cool. Like
Yeah.
that's neat,
Wow.
to kind of navigate that. And again, I think we all need those things too to look back on
Mhm. Mhm.
and go, oh yeah, this wasn't just happenstance. You
Right.
did these things to make this end goal happen.
Absolutely.
What's next? Because
Yeah.
we always have something else we want to do. And when we haven't done it at all, it's so easy to just go like, I don't, all we have to compare it to are the people who are already successful and already doing it. Like, how am I possibly gonna get to that level?
Right.
But when we could take a step back and go, okay, what have I done purposefully? And, you
Right.
know, put those things into motion. And then it gives us that little bit of confidence to just take that first step and then do oh, okay, I can kind of maybe do this, get a little more confidence and keep going down that road.
Absolutely. A lot of people don't get that taste of I have to do this. We have a lot of people, men especially, who don't have something to look forward to, right? And they don't realize that they control whether or not there's something to look forward to. So with you, how old were you when you picked up that book? Out of curiosity, do you remember?
Oh gosh. It would have been, what do you think? Like, I can't remember the year that the book came out. Maybe 2012, maybe 10 years ago.
Okay, so in your
2012, 2013, somewhere in there.
okay,
Yeah.
all right. So I'm wondering where were you in your life at that time that made you really think about wanting to find out who you are? Because did you know your purpose back then, or did you discover your purpose around that time?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, my main drive,
Hmm.
like from high school until about 2010, was film, movies, making movies. That was it. It was one of those like I knew in my soul that if somebody handed me $100 million, it would be like, okay, what are you gonna do now? I'm going to take this money and make a movie. It was like
Got it. Right.
it wasn't like
Absolutely.
that quit and go do something else.
Mhm.
And so that was my main driver for the longest time
Right.
until and that was the weirdest thing. But there was a time it just that passion and desire just went away. I had plenty of, I mean, that's just what I did, at all
Right.
different variations from shooting and lighting and
Mhm.
producing and doing all that.
Mhm.
And that was almost a switch, like a light switch being turned off. That was the strangest thing that desire and that passion it went away almost overnight. Like
Wow.
I was physically ill at the thought of being on a set. I mean, it was crazy. And so there was some time in there for sure of like, now what? Because
Now what? Right.
that's been it. Like that's been the North Star, right?
Mhm.
Forever. Um, what filled that and a little bit of crossover there as I was getting interested in producing when I was making
Mhm.
movies and all of that, which is very much the logistic side, the business side, all of that,
Right.
which I loved as much as the creative shooting and lighting side. That enjoyment and passion kind of came in there, that love of business, specifically marketing and
Right.
sales.
Right.
Um, and so that sort of sent me down that path, which,
Right.
just kind of following that. And
Yeah. Well, no, something I've been actually working on for myself, and it's been very interesting to see it. Is I've had my business life has been, and then I look at the timeline and I overlay what was happening in my personal life at the same time stuff was happening in my professional. So I'd like to ask you if I can get a little personal question is um, around that time, let's say 2012. I know you've told me you've gone through a divorce like I have. While you were going through that divorce, which is a very stressful thing, whether or not the divorce turns out okay and all that, and what was happening, to give me that timeline of personal and professional at the same time, and how you handled it, and how you got through that situation.
during the divorce time,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm very fortunate that, it's very positive situation. I mean, my ex and I are incredibly good co-parents and just
Mhm.
friends and on the same page. And,
Yeah.
and I count myself so fortunate for that constantly. Um, and it doesn't mean it wasn't hard,
Right.
by
Right.
any
Right.
means.
Right.
So we'll say the first time we were getting a divorce
Yeah.
was 2018,
Okay.
and you know she came to me. I want to get a divorce. Um, and honestly, the biggest stressor in all of it, the most anger inducing aspect of it was me being away from my boys. I've got three boys.
Mhm.
Um, and the fact that I would see them 1 second less than I would have otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
like that's you know, that's the most anger of the situation.
Sure. Sure.
So we were still living in the same place, for a couple of months, and um, won't go into all the details and stuff, but
Yeah.
she then came back and said, "I want to, let's give this another shot." Um, I had actually met someone in between that, and I think seeing that scared the shit out of her, a little bit. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I know I did. That's her words,
Of course. Absolutely.
Um, and I knew for the sake of my boys, for the sake of everything, um, I had to give this another shot. It was just I felt in my being like I had to, and there were no words she possibly could have said to say like, "Hey, let's try this again." There were no words at all,
Mm-hmm.
but I saw it in her. I saw the physical change in here of scaredness of a different person and all of
Right.
that. Um, and that was hard, of course,
Right.
ending things with who I'd met and going back into this. But
Right.
for a year and a half, she was a different person. Like, I mean, it
Okay.
was amazing. Like in all the best ways, for her sake, for my sake, everything,
Absolutely. Right.
Um, and then started, about a year and a half into that. Fortunately, we got up to Colorado. We've been wanting to get up here for years.
Right.
And she hit me with it again,
Mm-hmm.
almost 2 years to the month, and the biggest thing was like at the time was just like it was just this assumption we would move back to Texas. That's where family is and all that. And I was like, we just got it. Are you kidding me? Like in my
Yeah.
head, I'm like, give me one summer in
Yeah.
Colorado,
Yeah.
not in freaking Dallas, Texas heat. I
Mm-hmm.
love you, Dallas, but dear goodness. Uh,
Right.
Fortunately, we stayed up here and all of that. And,
Yeah.
and, the boys through all of it, my older boys had a, tougher time the first time through the first one. But all of us, um, we'd kind of had a dry run through this thing, you know? So I'd come to terms already. I've gone through that of like, okay, what is joint custody going to look like? What
Right.
is this, going to look like? So, I mean, it really was a lot easier. It was the hardest on my youngest the second time around because the first time he just wasn't old enough to like process what was going on and everything.
Right. Right.
Um, and so it's been really good. I mean, it's been nothing but open communication and
Mm-hmm.
really just great stuff. I mean, I don't know if it's a main reason why, but I remember having, I had that positive the positive role models. A friend of mine from elementary school, like we're still friends today.
Yeah.
His parents had been divorced, and they were always that amazing example of exes who were always at his functions and
Right.
always that stuff, and
Yeah.
just amazing relationship between those. So there was a little bit of example there,
Right.
which was great.
Yeah.
And we've seen it when we've all seen it and heard the stories. And when we were going through our divorce, we had friends of ours who just happened to be going through it at the same time that
Yeah.
just, I mean, you talk about the complete opposite and
Right.
just felt so bad. Um, because it was just it was the ugly version.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you mentioned about positive role models when you were going through that. Can you think about, growing up? Who was your mentor, your role model growing up?
So raised by my mom, single mom.
Mhm.
She certainly gave me that foundation of, oh, you too. Yeah. Yeah. She gave me that foundation of love, which is really a kind of miracle because she didn't have it. She wasn't supported that way, the way she just somehow knew that she was going to, love her kid and give that support and foundation. So I
Yeah.
had that from day one.
Yeah.
We had our rough patch, as I became a person
Of course.
of my
Yeah.
own
Yeah. Yeah.
and off on my own. And that led to, a lot of things, we get
Yeah.
into or not. Um, but we're back to, a good relationship again, which is good.
Yeah.
Uh, but and then my grandparents were, I spent, I mean, all my time, with them, certainly all
Uh-huh.
summers with them.
Right.
And they were really my role models in, um, just hard work, that work ethic,
Right.
entrepreneurialism,
Yeah.
all of that, which I mean, was always kind of in me from, I mean, they tell me stories of being 5 or 6 years old, standing out on the side of the road, like selling rocks that I'd found, like
Well,
putting out there to cars that
Jason
came by,
selling rocks. All right.
Yeah.
That's
And but yeah, just getting that mentorship. And then it's wild. I kind of I had that father figure through a big span of time from my senior year of high school, getting my first internship with a video production company.
right.
Um, Ended up working there for 5 years, had a great sort of father figure,
Yeah.
with the guy who ran that company. And then
Right.
that it was almost like a handoff as I went, um, found the film program in college that I was in, and he was, a dad to all of us and just an amazing mentor,
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was interesting to, to to find those role models and those people to look to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's very, very important. We just launched a podcast with my son, and he wanted me to do a podcast with him. And he told me, which surprised me, but I shouldn't be surprised. He told me that as far back as 4 years ago, he didn't see me as his mentor or a role model. It was his grandfather, my dad,
Oh
because
wow.
he felt, and he just hadn't been able to articulate his emotions for years. He had seen me running around, the issues with the marriage and working in the hospitals, and that when I was home, I really wasn't home. I was physically there, but not mentally. He picked up on that.
Mm,
And it's only been since my dad passed away in the last year and a half. He told me this just a couple of days ago that now he sees me as a mentor and a role model because I'm paying attention to him. And I didn't
wow.
realize at the time that I was acting that way. And instead of taking it personally and getting upset, I said, you know what, I got to do things differently. And the whole thing about mentor is so important because a lot of us men go without a mentor
Mm.
for whatever reason, and it doesn't have to be your father. If it can't be your father, it can be somebody else. And so I'm happy you had that, growing up.
Yeah,
And
it's wild. We're all we are that role model, whether we're conscious of it or not.
hmm.
So we've all learned,
Yeah,
you know. And so the sooner and the better you can get aware of that and then be
yeah,
purposeful and you know it doesn't have to be, that's the thing, like if you care about being a father, which I personally do, um,
right,
then it can get big, right? It can get like, oh my gosh, I've got to be this exact, I've got to do this and I've got to do that, and sometimes that
right,
leads to withholding the bad stuff or
right, right.
not expressing yourself. Or in my case, I think it's been I'm go I've got to get this thing done before I can
Mhm.
really be an example to my kid. I have to make X amount of, I have to accomplish this next goal or this.
Right,
Um, and I think there's been some, chances of just a little bit extra time, a little bit extra conversation or this and that, because I didn't feel I was qualified to teach maybe this thing or that thing
right.
as much as I mean, if I took anything to heart, the cliches when you first have kids that everyone tells you is to go so fast and all this. If that's one thing I took to heart above anything else, and just every minute I can, be there, and it's still too fast and goes to,
Right.
but
Absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely.
hung on as much as possible. So if I screwed everything else up, these three boys know in their, from the very core of their being that they
Yeah.
are loved, right?
Right.
There's a foundation of that. And
Absolutely.
if everything else was screwed up, well, I'm sorry, but like at least there's that.
Yes. Yes. No, that's an awesome point. Moving back into your professional life, I know podcasting is a big part of your life right now. Tell me a little about how you got into it, and tell us a little about your podcasting experience with Strategy and Action and Concentric.
Yeah, absolutely. So, had that first show, Startup Dallas,
Mhm.
left that. We did probably 80 something episodes
Right.
in a year or so, in person interviews, which again, it was just a blast. I left that company and I was like, I've got to keep this going.
Yeah.
Um, and so I went down to the basics because okay, I'm going to be doing this on my own. I had the
Yeah.
the luxury of somebody shooting it, somebody editing the episodes and all of that.
Right.
So I'm doing it all myself. So it
Right.
needs to be a single camera. It needs to be a simple edit, all of that.
Right.
So
Right.
I was like, oh, let me do this Seinfeld style and interview people driving around. Uh, and
Okay.
so I worked out all the great, because it's still got to look good. I mean, that's my background, right? So it's got to look good. It's got to sound good. So I did the Jason Croft show because that's the most obnoxious name I could come up with. And
There
so
you
I
go.
picked that one. And we did 50, 60 something episodes
Wow. Okay.
of that one. Similar audience, the startup folks, business folks, they're in Dallas,
Right.
driving them around.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was so funny. And I had this thought and this feeling on both shows, but especially driving, multimillionaires around, successful restaurant chain owner, like just
Yeah.
these. And in my head, I'm just like, they know this is just a little YouTube show, right? Like, what is going on here? Like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And some of them even, that was why, like Phil Romano, who owns, Macaroni Grill and blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah, like
Right.
on down the line, he agreed to it because it was different, right? It was just like, oh, this is me something different I'm going to go do.
Right.
So, we had made the move. So in between that show and Strategy and Action, we made the move to Colorado. I was still, in-person interviews. That's just what I want to do and all of that. And again, one of the benefits of the pandemic was
Mhm.
being
Yeah.
forced to figure out this remote version, right?
Right. Right.
And I'm so grateful of it because obviously that opened up my world of who I can interview and the audiences and everything.
Right.
And and so that was very purposeful there. Again, okay, how do I do this so it doesn't look horrible? It's not just a blah,
Right.
Zoom call recorded or whatever. And so, I created that look and figured that out. And when I launched, had a business partner and we were both interviewing folks and stuff like that for a few episodes. And I just took all that, back over. And so interviewing and you know, folks very much just like this, loving it, having a blast. Really
Yeah.
shifted the focus a month or two ago to very specifically be targeting coaches and consultants and
Mhm.
interviewing coaches, consultants. Like that's the audience, those are the guests,
Right.
they're everything.
Mm.
And really, my approach, which I've used for myself, and then what I encourage with my clients, which is very different approach, is immediate sales conversations. Like think of it that way. This
Right.
isn't create content marketing for, 2 years and maybe somebody's interested one day and all of that. Like, well, no, you can interview your ideal clients, strategic partners who have an audience of your ideal clients, being very conscious. So interview one can benefit your business,
Right.
right?
Right.
The
Absolutely.
audience will come eventually. All of that, the evergreen content you're creating, it's great.
Mhm.
It'll live on. It can be all those things that content marketing promises, but you can actually benefit, the bottom line tomorrow, by doing that and taking that approach. And then Concentric is a show I'm doing with a friend of mine, Gary De Rodriguez, who's just an incredible, he's been, coach and therapist and all of it for 30 years.
Right.
And it's really a selfish kind of endeavor of like, I just love this. He needs attention. Like all his stuff that he's got going on really needs to get brought out in the world. So,
Right.
each one of those episodes is me teeing him up and letting him go.
That's wonderful. We're going to wrap it up. I'm going to two more questions, and then we'll open up to questions and answers for the audience. So, the, there's two questions, both involve advice you'd give. So, personally, You're talking to the young Jason Croft, the 9-year-old Jason Croft. What advice would you give him right now about life?
Confidence is everything.
Mhm.
Like it's everything. And that's the great struggle of I think so many of us, especially through the teen years and going
Right.
through and like everybody's just as worried about who they are and what people think of them as you are experiencing right now. If you can put that aside and confidence is everything and just start sooner, do more, those little inklings of eh, accomplishment, like those little goals that you want, stuff like that. Just go, start now, start today, keep
Wonderful.
going.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. The second one is the professional hat. You are now giving advice to the young Jason Croft who's ready to start his first business. What advice would you give him?
Oh gosh. Just talk to people, talk to more people every single day. Not this vague, oh, I've got to have this set up and that set up and all of this before I can start having those conversations
Mhm.
about what I do. No, it's like just me, like no one can buy anything from you if they don't know you're selling it, right? So talk about that in as many ways as possible, as often as possible, um, which is probably still advice I need today for myself.
And quite often we don't take our own advice. So thank you for sharing everything, Jason. This has been an absolute pleasure. We're going to switch gears and we're going to open up questions and answers to the audience. You up for that?
Sounds great.
All right, here we go. So, gentlemen, any questions or statements or anything for Jason?
I've got one. So, during all of my transitions, there was always a financial aspect of it that, I didn't hear through this because, going like with you going through a divorce, changing careers, you know, I've been let go from one place and went, oh man, what am I going to do now? Like you stated before. And, there was a financial gap there that you also had to struggle with. Did you have to deal with that? Was it a major factor in your divorce? Dealing with your kids, because everything hits us at one time every blue moon, and you're just dealing with 50 different things coming at you at the same time, but one of them is the major focus is financial. And so did you, when you left film and all of that, did you have those kind of struggles, moving forward once you left that industry and started figuring out what you need to do? Because I think a lot of men need to hear support on that kind of end as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an area that so the good part is like I've just always been comfortable with the entrepreneurial side of like I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Like, my ex, like complete opposite. Like I need to know this. I need to, and we're all one or the other, right? Like that if you're that entrepreneurial, you don't care as much, you're just not worried about it for whatever reason. That being said, like that's also been my biggest struggle, like through even when I was in the film days, all the way to now, is just that roller coaster. And I haven't nailed that down. I haven't figured that out. Um, when I went from film and like, oh, what am I going to do? And freelancing there, don't want to do that anymore. I took a full-time job. That role of that video production company was a full-time job there that I was fortunate. I had a relationship with the guy who owned the company and went in there and talked to him. It's like, hey, I'd love to come in and do this for you. And he's like, cool. So I did that for, 6 years there before I went out on my own again. Through the divorce, again, just incredibly fortunate that it is just such a, hey, you know, here's what we're going to do. It's all just verbal, like, there's no alimony, there's no this and that, at all, because it was very much just this amicable, hey, we're going to do this thing. We would have actually been done faster if it weren't for the mandated things from, from the state. It was so there wasn't, I don't want to say there was no financial struggles, because yes, throughout all of it, because I've, done that still to this day, right? Those changes, I think it drew out the timeline more of, again, that advice that giving myself, still need to take that. I still need to be more purposeful with just, here's what I'm doing. Let me drive more sales every month. So yeah, I don't know if that helps.
You know, I think relationships also change as well when you go from having your own thing to now having a full-time job. You don't have the focus on maybe your family as much as when you had your own thing. Because with me, I have a 19-year-old. I started this company 22 years ago, and I'm very fortunate that I got to spend every second with my son growing up. And I always dreaded if I had to get a full-time job, I would
Yeah.
lose. So did that affect your kind of situation as well?
Yeah, it was a little flipped and similar both. So it's the freedom, right? Like it's great. My ex went back and forth from like having a job, not having a job, all of that. Like we would decide like, okay, this is great. Just stay home, be with the boy. But I had big stretches, right, between just freelance gigs or whatever it was, where I was the one at home, which she still didn't ever believe me, but I loved it. I loved so much, like being home, being with those boys. And my second child, like I had that from almost day one for the first several years of his life. I mean, it was like, I want dad. That's it. Like, and of course, that feels great, right? Because I had that freedom, like to be there. But at the same time, like when my first son was born, I was gone 6 months out of that year because freelance jobs took me all around the world, and I was here and I was traveling, and you don't say no, because like, when's the next one coming, right? And so that's why it was a little bit flipped, where when I took the full-time job in 2010, it allowed me to have just this regular schedule. I wasn't, traveling like crazy. We knew what was coming in, and so it actually brought some stability there. But in both cases, it was really sort of, every second was with family and with the boys, if I wasn't in there. So it didn't stretch that or change that too much.
Great.
But yeah, that flexibility though, that's everything. Like, it's not that you necessarily have all your hours to yourself or this and that, but I know when something, because I know where my priority is. It's going to be, if I get that call, I don't care if, I have a full-time job or it's my own thing, it's a client, like I'm gone, I'm there with my boys if I need to be. And so that is amazing to be able to have that flexibility. And honestly, too, that full-time job, I was very fortunate to, it was as close to like having your own business as you can in a full-time job, with that flexibility and things. So
Mm-hmm. Yep. Perfect.
Jason, thanks for sharing. That's it's good stuff. You were talking earlier about the concept of sell now. Okay, with some of your creative work, and I'm just wondering, through the evolutions that you've been through, because I'm sure that the divorce was, I can't even imagine. Do you think that prompted it? Because it just seems to me that selling, at least for the last 5 to 10 years, has been kind of like a very soft shoe. Don't do the closing questions. Don't get pushy and lose the plaid jacket. So do you think that had any impetus in saying, you know what, listen, life's short, got to go for it now?
clarify what clarify what you mean. What's
Well,
the
for instance, when you were talking about how you do these let's sell now on your commercials or the pod, whatever, you were talking about.
Mm.
I'm just wondering because my experience with, people who've been through really challenging emotional things like a divorce, okay, is that they're like, you know what, fine, I'm done, it's over, man. I got to live life. Okay, there is no more time. I got to move on, and there is no tomorrow. I'm just wondering, did that have any influence on some of your creative work?
I don't know. I haven't made that connection, but it's possible. Um, for sure. I think for me, I've been in that camp of, hey, we can be humans and connected and sell to each other really easily and all done in a beautiful way. Like I don't have these silos that people are so staunch in, and fortunately we are moving away from that, right? But like, well,
Right.
no, you can't, you have to give value and you can't sell anything and you can't talk about having something for sale, like come on. Like I've just been more at ease with that. And so I think that philosophy has more influenced that approach that I mentioned for the shows.
Appreciate it. Cool.
So we've learned a lot about Jason. I want to give each one of you a chance to just tell Jason a little about yourselves and what you do, and then then we can wrap it up. So who wants to start? Mike, you want to start since you've been so quiet in your construction area?
Yeah, so I'm Mike Van Pelt. I'm a men's life coach. I have True Man Life Coaching, and I do a podcast as well, the True Man Podcast. And what's amazing is I found this incredibly hard to sit through because I wasn't asking questions or giving answers, and it was fantastic. So this was actually brutal for me. Okay, I'm going to tell you.
Oh, that's
But
great.
Jason, man, great. It was great hearing your story. I can relate to so many things you were talking about, especially from the podcast area, and so it was really hard for me not to jump in. But yeah, so I basically help men, and that's my quest in life. But the podcast is a big part of it because I love it. It's become a part of me, like it has you. So it was cool to hear that. Thanks for sharing.
That's awesome. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Fred, tell us a little about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Fred Costa. I'm CEO of NSC Information Technology Group here in Houston, Texas. We're a 22-year-old managed service provider, IT outsourcing company, cyber disaster recovery planning. So companies will outsource their complete IT departments to us. We focus on 25 to 5,000 employees. And I've had 38 years of information technology experience as well. So way before I worked for corporations and those type of things. I really appreciate you telling your story because I think we've all gone through transitions. I haven't gone through a divorce. I hope I never have to, but the transitions from leaving one job to the next and worrying about that and all the struggles within family and how certain things happen throughout your life that, I mean, you can make one decision and it'll just derail everything into another direction. So I really appreciate your story.
Awesome. Thank you.
Jason, I'm Scott Lask. I'm the owner and founder of the Wealth Management Group. We're a boutique wealth advisory, and we tend to focus more on people's emotional relationship with money, how they think about money, their greed versus fear emotions, and keeping an eye on economic policy because that's what drives everything. And that's why you're paying. I mean, I saw one store. It's over $8 for a dozen and a half eggs. It's like you got to ask yourself, what? And like everyone here, I've gone through my evolutions, my trials and tribulations, and it's great because I think when we all go through them, when fear starts to really grip your heart, okay, you feel alone. You feel like you're the only one on planet Earth because everyone's life is beautiful. The rainbows and unicorns are prancing on their lawn, not yours. And it's like you just, you start to say, maybe I'll get my backpack out and just disappear into like the Northwest. But thank you for sharing.
Yes, thank you. And it's a great point too with all of this. And Drew, I love what you're doing, and of course, there's a big reason I wanted to be a part of this group, because I think something left out of the discussion of transitions and going through all of this stuff is the work, right? This kind of work, this kind of personal development, self-reflection, that's the only thing that gets you through this kind of stuff in any kind of positive way, right? And it's something I learned a while ago was personal development wasn't this end goal. Like, I don't do this thing and now everything's perfect. I don't learn this thing and then it's all done. And I say I learned that because I know I had that mindset. I was constantly frustrated with myself because since being a teenager, listening to Tony Robbins tapes and Les Brown and, going through this stuff and been on that journey, learning those tools. And finally it hit me. It's like, okay, well, this isn't a done. This is so that when you're in that transition time and this shit's hitting you, it doesn't keep that stuff from happening. But when you're going through it, you can go, okay, this is what needs to happen now. This is how it's affecting this person. The more of those tools that you learn through this whole process, that's everything. And, bringing it all the way back to, the tipping point and having that picture of like, oh, that's what it could look like. Well, that's what this group is exactly for. So that if nobody's ever heard of personal development before, the men who it's not in our conversation and they haven't grown up with, they haven't why ever, that's happened, why it's happened.
Jason,
they can point to it. Yeah.
I didn't have any good male role models until I was 24. My father died when I was 7 suddenly. My uncles meant well, but they really were just, big bullshit artists, wannabes. And, you flounder, you feel like you're literally like, if you've ever been deep in the wilderness and it's dark and you don't have a flashlight, you really can't see your fingers in front of your face. Okay. And you realize after a while that you can read all the Tony books you want, but if you don't do the work, and it's finding out what it actually means, the concept of you got to do the work. That's just going to sound crazy because Drew knows I'm Jewish. This is when you have your come to Jesus moment. But you got to have that, at least for me. Yeah. I got to have that because otherwise the light bulb won't go off.
No.
So, Drew can tell you, I'm slowly becoming a fanatic to supporting this group.
Thank you, Scott.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe and give us a review to help others find it. If you find yourself immersed in adversity and would like to find support from other men in times of struggle, please become a member of my Men Supporting Men collaboration tribe by emailing me at drew@profitcompassion.com, expressing your interest, and I'll get in touch with you. Speak to you soon.